Hi guys, welcome back to my channel where the gnomes live. This is Sharon Oyella, and today we're going to be making paper clay. Now I've made paper clay for many years, but I've never made it this way. So we're going to try the first batch I have there. I'm going to be trying with egg cartons and our blender. And then the second batch I'm going to be trying with plain cardboard, and we're going to break it down by hand. So no blender involved. And we only need 3 ingredients. At the end of the video, I'm going to be throwing together this acorn house. Now, this is not a tutorial for the painting and all that. I just want to use both batches of clay, and then I'm going to talk about some of the things that I found using the clay. All right, so make your journey with paper clay making a little bit easier. Again, this is my first attempt at this style of paper clay. I've done it for many years, but I've never done it this way before. So let's do it together. And remember that there are detailed timestamps in the pinned comment below. Let's get started. Alright, so for this batch I'm going to use 4 egg cartons. I'm also going to use salt, flour, white glue, and I'm going to be making liquid starch out of this cornstarch here. Now most people don't use that. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute here. So when you're putting them into the blender, I found that the bottom half of the egg carton, 1 was enough. If you put any more than that, they don't blend right. So 1 bottom half of the egg carton, and if you put the lids in, you can get away with 2 lids. And you can see I'm breaking them down into smaller pieces. That's going to help the blender. If you put too much in, of course, it's just not going to blend. That's all that's going to happen. Nothing bad will happen. You just won't get a good result. So I'm going to leave this on high for 1 minute. A couple of seconds over there, no big deal. I see a piece there, it has not dropped down, so I'll just remove that, and that'll go into the next batch. But this is pretty much what it should look like after a minute. Completely broken down. There might be the odd larger piece. You just want to go through and remove those and set them aside. Those can go into the next batch. And you can see quite a bit of dust there. That's why I recommend a mask. Also open up your window. So I'm going to put some hot water in. This is from the kettle. This is not enough water, so I'm going to put some in from the tap as well. And again, this is hot water. I just find that helps break it down a little bit faster. I'm going to thoroughly mix that up, and now this is going to go back into the blender. But you don't want to put the whole thing into the blender because that's just going to overwork the blender. So I'm just going to put half the batch in. And you want to have that much water that you see there. This will also help the blender break that pulp down. So I'm going to stick this back on high for a minute. And I think 1.5 minutes should be the maximum that you do here. It doesn't need any more than that. But I shut mine off after a minute, and you'll see it's turned to quite mushy here. So that broke it down quite a bit. I'm going to leave this sitting in hot water again for about a half an hour to an hour, just to make sure that the bigger pieces that aren't broken down get broken down even further. Right, after an hour or so, I just lay a towel down. I'm going to scoop a few spoonfuls into this towel, and I'm going to squeeze all the water out of it. So just keep twisting, squeezing that water out. Don't worry about getting every last drop. You just want to get the majority of the water out of there. So it should look like this when you're done. And it's still damp. There's just no water dripping out of it. I'll keep going here. When I have my boyfriend do this, it takes half the time because his hands are bigger and stronger than mine. But he's at work right now and I had to do it all by myself. But I eventually got it done. Alright, now that we have the water strained out, we're going to break it all up into little crumbles. So there's no big pieces left in there. Let's count how many cups we have in here. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we got 7 cups of pulp out of there. And now we can start adding our ingredients. And I'm going to start with liquid cornstarch like I told you in the beginning. Not everybody uses it. So if you'd like to omit this part, you can just replace this with more white glue. So I just put a cup of hot water into the pot, and now I'm going to put a tablespoon of cornstarch. And you want to start with hot water first because that will break down that cornstarch a lot faster. Alright, so I have the element on high, and I'm going to continually stir this until it just about comes to a boil. And it goes from milky white like this until a translucent color, and then it'll be a thick starch. And it takes about a minute or so. And we're almost there. I can see the milky white color fading away, and it's turning translucent here, just about a boil. There we go. I can turn it off. And you can see, look at that, nice and thick. And of course I do this first because it is very hot and you want this to cool down before you start mixing, right? So I find if I put it in first, I don't have to worry about it. And I'm going to rinse out this pot with hot water. You just saw hot water going in there. I'm just going to measure it out so you can see. It's about a 1/4 cup of hot water. And that was just to clean out the pot and add a little bit more water to the clay. There was another teaspoon or so in there. I also add salt to my clay. Now, a lot of people don't do that. I do it because I live in the rainforest and I have to worry about mold. Okay, so I put about 4 tablespoons of salt. You can put more if you want to. 4 or 5 tablespoons. And now we're going to add some white glue. This is just your Elmer's glue all. And I'm going to put in a cup. You can actually put more in if you have a bit more pulp than I have here. It's not going to hurt anything, but just a cup or so of white glue. And now we're going to add some flour. Now I have whole wheat flour. You don't have to use that. You can use white flour as well. And I'm going to put about a cup in. I think 3/4 of a cup to a cup is enough. I think I had a little bit too much flour here. So if I was going to do this one again, I would probably put in 3/4 of a cup and then mix it. And if I needed more, I could add more after that. But either way, if you put a little bit too much flour in, there's no harm done. It's just going to be a little bit on the stickier side. So I just put a towel underneath there to keep it from sliding around. And I'll mix this up for probably about 3 or 4 minutes. And it was sticking to my hands, so I'm going to wet my hands. Got the water running there. So I'm not putting extra water in, just water on my hands. That will help the clay from sticking to my fingers as I mix it. So I'm just going to test this out here. I'm going to roll some in my hand and see if it holds a ball shape. And it does. Let's try the butter knife test here. So I'm just going to lay some out in my hand and just spread it out with a butter knife. And this is exactly what you want to see. Every batch is going to feel a little bit different and you're not doing anything wrong. As long as you can spread it out like that, if you can roll it into a ball, it's totally fine. It's going to work. All right, my friends, we are going to use this clay at the end of the video, but for now we're going to store it in the fridge. So I just put it into a clean, airtight container. I'm going to mark the date on there. And we want to use up our homemade clay within a week. Give or take a day or so. I've actually had my homemade clay last up to a week and a half. So you just want to make sure it's stored in an airtight container and you keep it in the fridge when you're not using it. Alright guys, we're going to move on to the next batch of clay, and this one we're not going to be using the Ninja. We're going to break down pieces of cardboard by hand. Alright, so let's get started. Alright guys, we're going to try this again with cardboard and without the Ninja. We're going to be soaking this in hot water. So I just have the measurements there. That's for my own benefit. So I could add it up and give you the approximate size of the larger piece of cardboard that I cut this down from. And it was a little bit better than 1 foot by 4 feet. Also keep in mind that this cardboard that I'm using is very sturdy. So it's a little bit sturdier than a prime Amazon box. And now I'm going to pull off the layers, the top and bottom layer. And once it was sitting in the water for a minute or so, this got super easy. This is way easier to do this wet than dry, of course. So just exposing the center of the cardboard by pulling off the back and top layer. And then I'm going to break it down into smaller pieces. And so much easier to do this while it's wet. Alright, so I got that all broken up. Now I'm going to stick it into a smaller bowl so I can have my sink back. Because I'm going to put this all into a bowl and I put more hot water in there. And I'm going to leave it soak overnight. Alright, so the next day it is broken down quite a bit more, but there's large pieces in there that I have to smash up. So I'm just going to drain or get out the pulp and leave as much water behind as possible. And now I'm going to use this little tool here. If you don't have one of those, maybe a glass jar would work. I'm just going to pound these pieces down because you don't want these big pieces like you see there. So I think I was actually timing this and it went about 5 or 6 minutes of me pounding it down, and then I realized there's some pieces in there that are not breaking down. I think I'm going to show them here in a second. So yeah, so if I pull it apart, you can see pieces of cardboard that are still kind of intact. So what I'm going to do to save myself some time, I'm going to soak it with hot water and I'm going to leave it for about a half an hour. Just see if that helps break it down a little bit more. So after half an hour, I noticed that it was broken down quite a bit more. So I'm going to use a strainer here and just strain out as much water as I can and stick it into the other bowl. And then I went to pounding that again, and I realized that I'm going to be spending a lot of effort. So again, I'm going to just soak this for half an hour. And this was the last time I had to do this. Like I said earlier, the box I used was very thick, very sturdy, so if I would have used an Amazon Prime box, perhaps it would have broke down a lot faster. I don't know. Anyways, a few extra soakings and a few extra beatings, we finally got there. So now I'm going to strain out the water. Again, just little bits at a time in a towel. And drain out as much water as you can. And this is what you want to see. It's still damp, but there's no water dripping out of it. Now I'll put this into the other bowl and I'll just do the rest of it. And now that I have it all strained of water, I'm going to break it up into little crumbles. And once that was done, I measured it out so you could see how many cups of pulp we ended up with. And with that little measuring cup here, I'm going to go back and forth. And in the end, we ended up with 10 cups of pulp and a little tiny bit extra. And again, you want to make sure it's broken down to those little tiny pieces. Now we can add our ingredients. And just like the first batch, I'm going to use liquid starch. And again, if you want to omit this, you can replace it with more glue. And just rinsing out my pot there with some hot water. And I measured it out and it came out to about a 1/4 cup. And because I had 10 cups of pulp, I ended up putting in too much glue. So I put in a full cup and then I put in another full cup. I don't know why I did that. It doesn't matter really in the long run. It really doesn't. I could have got away with a 1.5 cups of glue, but I put a full other cup in there. And then I'm going to put in about 5 or 6 tablespoons of salt. And again, I'm using whole wheat flour. You don't have to use the same. You can use white flour. And I'm going to be putting in a 1.5 cups, approximately. And right about here, I realized I probably had too much glue in here, which is not a big deal. It's not a problem at all. It just made the clay a little bit runny, but I'm going to solve that here in a second. So when I was done mixing, I just laid a dry cloth over top and just pressed down. And I kept doing that till I got some of the glue out of there. And I hope by showing you the mistakes that I made here, and even though I made them, the clay still turned out great. You'll see here, I'll roll it up. It's going to be totally fine. So you can play around with those ingredients. You can stick in a little bit more glue, a little less glue, maybe a little bit more flour, a little less flour. It's still going to turn out. And every batch is going to get easier and easier as you make your own clay. All right, so we're going to test out this clay. I'm going to cover this jar with the first batch that I made. And I'm just going to spread it evenly over the entire surface. Once I was done that, I dipped my fingers in water and just smoothed out the surface. Very, very lightly. Now I'm going to outline a door here. So, and again, I'm not doing a tutorial on how to do this house. I just want to test out the clay, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. I'm just going to kind of make it look like an acorn very quickly. So outline the door, put some lines in there for wood paneling, and then I'm going to make a little hole here for the window in the door. And then I rolled out like a worm shape, and I'm going to outline the door. And you do want to work this in a little bit into the clay that you're putting it on, right? And then I'm going to use my awl and I'm going to make like separate rocks all the way up and around. And I did work in the edges into the previous clay, so they become one piece. And now I'm just going to make some windows and making a little like a fungus like shape. I'm going to make this on top of the windows. And again, I'm going to work in these pieces so that they become one piece with the previous clay. So working it in there with my awl. And I put one on top too. When I was done, I took a wet Q-tip and just wiped off the glass part because I am going to put light in here. And then I baked that for half an hour at 250 just to harden it up. It's not dry yet, but I needed to harden it up so I could make the cap. So I just made an outline there around the top edge, and I'm just filling in the center so I can put the final piece over top. And there we go. Now we can cover up the cap with the second batch of clay that I made. And again, just smoothing it out, even layer over the entire surface. And again, once I was done this one, I did wet my fingers again and just smoothed out what needed smoothing. And now I'm going to add the stem. So just another piece of foil. I'm going to push this right into the center, right into the clay there, and then I'll add clay over top. Taking a look at a real acorn cap, it does have some bumps on it, and I couldn't find anything to make that sort of texture, so I'm using a Scrub Daddy sponge. I'm just rolling it over the entire surface, just to give me some texture at least. And this didn't turn out half bad. I'm okay with this. Now I'm going to stick this whole thing in the oven and we'll be right back. Again, it was baked at around 250, and that's the low setting, and I left it in for about an hour and a half, and I noticed that the thinner pieces warped, so they went all a little bit wonky. Now if I had put a foil form first and then the clay over that, they would have held their shape, but because it was just clay on their own and it dried so fast, it warped. You can let it air dry. It'll take a few days to let them air dry, but then they won't get that warped part to them. So I'm just going to remove the warped pieces here with my pliers. I'm going to be adding more clay. And again, I did bake it after this and with the clay, and it was fine, but I only left it in for about a half an hour. So these are things that you want to keep in mind. And again, you can let them air dry. It just takes quite a bit longer. I would air dry it with a fan. Alright, so I did put it back in the oven for a half an hour, and that was at 250, and that's close to the lowest setting on the oven. And you can go lower than that, of course. There was no more warpage, and that was because I didn't leave it in very long. I heard many years ago you can't paint wet paper clay, otherwise you're exposing the piece to mold. So this is why I like to thoroughly dry out my pieces before painting. If you're looking for a fine detail type paper clay where you can work in fine details, please visit Johnny Good's channel, because she's an expert at paper clay and she's got her own recipes, and she's been working fine details in some of her paper clay for many years. So this paper clay that I'm using for this little acorn here is pretty similar to the paper clay I've been using for many years, and it's basically a good clay for strengthening up a structure. So this huge acorn I'm working on right now, and this is going to be a future video as well, guys, it was made out of foil, and then I covered it with paper clay, and that gave me a solid structure. Okay, so that's what this paper clay, this is what I use it for, is to strengthen up the structure. And it's great for making mushrooms and all that kind of great stuff. You can see here I was playing around a little bit with finger marks and stuff. I was going to sand them out later, but I did try that today, and it didn't sand out very well. So I think smoothing it out while it's wet is the best way to go. And obviously this huge acorn did not fit in the oven, so it's been air drying for the last few days with a couple of fans. And as soon as I'm done building this big one here, it will be coming up on video for you guys again, and then you'll be hearing more about paper clay in that video. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you know when the next video is available. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.